This conference will now be recorded.
Ryan, can you introduce yourself as one of our TAC co-chairs?
Oh, yes. Hi. Good morning. I'm Ryan Moyer. I'm one of the TAC co-chairs. Sorry if I couldn't hear anything before, but I can hear you now, Maya.
Okay, great.
Apologies for joining remotely.
That's all right. And so Kelly Hammer-Levy is our other TAC co-chair, but she couldn't be at this meeting today. We've also billed this as a joint meeting with the Nitrogen Management Consortium for some of the work that we're going to be discussing about Old Tampa Bay. Santino Provenzano with Mosaic is a co-chair for the Nitrogen Management Consortium, but isn't able to be here.
Jeff Greenwell. I'm the public side co-chair of the Nitrogen Management Consortium, and I work for Hillsborough County's Environmental Services Division.
And I'm Maya Burke. I'm the assistant director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Hi everyone, I'm Blake Simmons. I'm TBEP's environmental social scientist. Hello on the camera.
Hi, I'm Carrie Flaherty-Walia, the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's restoration ecologist. Nice to see you all in person. Hello online.
Hello everyone, my name is Sheila Scalaro. I'm the community program scientist with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Ed Sherwood, I'm the director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Hi folks, I'm Tiffany Lane with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Coastal Programs, working on coastal restoration. Hello, my name is Olivia Schley. I'm currently an intern with FWRI.
Natasha DeCrow with Pinellas County Environmental Management. I do monitoring and assessment, public education, and restore at grants management.
Hi, Nicole Maloney, also with Pinellas County Division of Environmental Management.
Christine Joyner, also with Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Dave Carlin, I'm with the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County.
Barbara Getting, Water Division, Environmental Protection Commission.
Kristen Martinez, Water Division, Environmental Protection Commission.
Joette Jernigan, Environmental Protection Commission, Water Division.
Lizanne Garcia, Southwest Florida Water Management District Swim Program.
Morning, everybody. Mark Schreibeck. I work with NOAA's National Marine Fishery Service Habitat Conservation Division. Good to see everybody in person again. Thanks.
Hello, Alana Todd. I'm the environmental planner here at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council.
Hi, Steve Myers. I'm research faculty at USF College of Science.
Good morning, Tim Bassett, City of Largo, wastewater manager.
Hi, I'm Carrie Birchfield. I'm with the City of Clearwater Public Utilities Department Compliance Coordinator.
I'm Julie Vogel. I see some friendly faces. I'm now with the City of St. Pete.
Sarah Herndon, I'm the Habitat Restoration Director at Tampa Bay Watch.
Ian Paul, Tampa Audubon Society.
Vicki Parsons, Space Sounding.
Bill Ferring, I'm the president of the Friends of Wheaton Island.
Sid Flannery, retired previously with the Southwest Florida Water Management District.
Megan Trent, FWRI, Fisheries Independent Watch.
Hi, good morning. Victoria Congdon, also at FWRI with Seagrass Lab.
Sarah Kaminsky, also FWRI and Harmful Algal Blooms. Carrie Lopez, FWRI, Harmful Aquaplants.
Rick Reynolds, Vic Environmental.
Will Nolan, Pinellas County, Environmental Management.
Stacy Day, Pinellas County.
Can I let my PE team introduce themselves at the end? So go over to the table.
Does anybody else need to go? Okay. Stephen Hesterberg, Gulf Shellfish Institute.
I'm Olivia Blondheim, also Gulf Shellfish Institute.
Kara Radabaugh, Coastal Wetlands Research at FWRI.
Hi, I'm Adontis, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Jeff Hilton, the City of Tampa.
Jennifer Schaefer, Schaefer Consulting.
Julie Morris, Schaefer Consulting.
David Schaefer, Schaefer Consulting.
And then we have 5 guests with us here today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Nancy Larson to introduce the team of folks that's here and tell us a little bit about the program evaluation. Super quick.
Well, so hi, Nancy Larson with EPA in Washington, D.C. I'm an NEP coordinator. I'm actually going to let these folks introduce themselves and then I'll say something.
See how she did that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Wow, that's pivoting, huh? I'm Felicia Burks, EPA Atlanta, Region 4, and I've been with the program for a number of years. Good to be here, and on the management board.
Hi, I'm Christy Foster. I'm the Executive Director with Tillamook Estuaries Partnership out of Tillamook, Oregon. So it's nice to see everybody. Claudia Wren, also with the Tillamook Bay Estuary Program. I'm the judge. And we're on the north coast of Oregon.
Morning, everybody. Great to be here. I'm Tom McGill. I work for EPA Region 4 out of Atlanta with Felicia. I'm a manager in the National Estuary Program. And our policy board member.
And policy board.
Yes, and I'm on the policy board as well.
So do you want me to go ahead and I'll stand over here so I don't have anybody at their back. So we're a team of folks that are reviewing progress being made here to implement your CCNP, and we're conducting something called a program evaluation. And so there's really 2 components. There's a package of information that's put together from Ed and his team. They send that in to us. And the review team is Christy, who's the ex officio director, Felicia, and myself. We take a look at it. Then we come and we do a site visit. And it's really nice to look and see, is there a continued commitment from the stakeholders to implementing the CCNP? That's another component that's important, as well as just progress implementing the CCNP. So after this, we'll go back, we'll confer and look and see, are there opportunities for improvement, and what are the strengths of the program? And I think overall, you all are doing an excellent job. I mean, you're just a fantastic staff program. We don't evaluate the staff, but I have to say they're excellent. And I've worked with a number of NEPs, and so I think I can, legitimately say that. So we're really happy to be here and listen to the discussion today and see a number of projects. And so Felicia or Christy, do you guys want to say anything?
No, I'm just happy to be here and excited. Haven't been down here in a while, so looking forward to it. We need to make a call so we can clear up the weather. So we can get out there and see all the great work that you guys are doing. So thank you for having us.
Yeah. So I was going to skip the online introductions unless you feel strongly about doing that. Okay. So the first topic on the agenda today is to talk about a draft request for proposals that we're putting together for the Old Tampa Bay Assimilative Capacity Assessment.
Sure, I'll say a couple things. One of the things we've struggled with when I was at the FDEP, we put together the 2 final orders to manage folks because we didn't really have a mechanism to do that. One of the things we subsequently struggled with is our existing model being able to see some of the smaller loads that were being permitted. We have loads being permitted down to 0.1 ton, which is less than a bag of fertilizer. And our model doesn't have that discretization to even be able to see many of the projects we do that are supposed to be offsetting that. So we've been taking that at face value. I think that this opportunity to study what's going on in Old Tampa Bay provides us an opportunity to see if a hydrologic model would be better suited for being able to marry up that needed reduced level of descritization, getting that on a much smaller grid, and being able to both see the success of those projects that we've been doing across the bay, potentially eventually expanding that model to see the whole bay. That's not sort of presently written into this proposal that way. That would be one of my suggestions, as we do not see these loads at the levels that we permit, at the levels FDP permits them. And the original intent, when Charles Kovich and I put this work together in conjunction with Janicki and the estuary program. It's hard to, so we have this level, or DP has this level of ability of enforcement, but what we can't see is whether those loads are having true impact or not, because our model doesn't tell us that presently, that empirical model. So that would be one suggestion I would have for this proposal, is to try to see if we can't get at least a much more discrete level of descritization within the results of the model, so we can see these point sources and possibly see other contributing factors that we may not even be aware of.
Cool, thanks. That's a good intro, Jeff, and I'll kind of dive into it a little bit more, give you a little bit of history and context of how we've been managing nitrogen loads to Tampa Bay, and hopefully set the stage of why we're embarking on this work, and to further elaborate on the points that Jeff was making, particularly in the Old Tampa Bay segment where we've been struggling with water quality. So this is a good opportunity to bring both the Technical Advisory Committee as well as Nitrogen Management Consortium members together and kind of talk about this work, because we've been forecasting this needed assessment as sort of our nitrogen management 2.0. We've long recognized that controlling nitrogen loads to the bay has been sort of the primary recovery of why we've seen improvements in Tampa Bay over the 30 plus years we've been getting together to get seagrasses back. And the guiding paradigm that we've been operating under has been, if we control those nutrient loads, we're going to have less algal blooms, less cloudy water clarity will improve, and then that will allow seagrasses to grow. And we've been operating under that assumption for well over 30 plus years now, and that guided a lot of the targets we've established to manage eutrophication indicators in the bay proper. So, like I said, it's been an evolution over this past 30 plus years, and this is sort of the next iteration of that evolution. That paradigm set up the stage of basically developing total nitrogen load targets for each of the major bay segments, and those later became regulatory limits in the form of a federally recognized TMDL for Tampa Bay back in 1998. Based on that establishment of the TMDL, based on our nitrogen load targets, through successive reasonable assurance updates to the state of Florida, we've had to develop allocations to each of the discrete sources of nutrient loads relative to those total nitrogen load limits for each of the base segments. And that's basically the work of the consortium, going all the way back to 1996. And we're now through 5 actual regional assurance updates. These are 5-year increments of reporting to the State Department of Environmental Protection as well as EPA, that we have a plan in place to address nitrogen load conditions that are supportive of continued water quality improvements and ultimately seagrass recovery in Tampa Bay. And that process has worked fairly well, going back to the early or mid 1990s. We saw a lot of seagrass recovery, as all you are aware, and we saw a significant reduction in nitrogen loads to the bay. The pie charts on the right are basically, the top pie is what was going into the bay in the 1970s in terms of total nitrogen loads, and the worst case scenario that we estimated through a lot of work that Janicki did for us, estimated that we were well over 9,900 tons of nitrogen going into Tampa Bay, predominantly coming from point sources, and through regulatory actions that were implemented early on in the 1980s, Grizzle-Fig Act, and some of the state legislation, there was a significant improvement in point source loads going into the bay, and that bottom pie chart basically reflects past 10 years average loadings to Tampa Bay, and that pie is significantly shrunk. We have about 2/3 less nitrogen loads going into Tampa Bay to the tune of about 3,300 tons. And the predominant source of those nutrient loads are that yellow portion of the pie of stormwater loads. So we have some challenges in terms of trying to address stormwater loads into the bay, non-point source loads into Tampa Bay. But we've effectively capped it at levels based on those TMDL targets and split those loads up to each of the discrete non-point sources in Tampa Bay. That table on the left basically reflects one bay segment, lower Tampa Bay, and how we split it up according to both the point source direct dischargers as well as reuse discharges, and then also MS4 non-point source loads in Tampa Bay. Basically that column on the right, the TMD load, that adds up to the load targets that we established back in the 1990s. And we've been operating under that assumption for quite some time, that if we maintain those loads, that we'll get good water quality, and that's certainly what we've seen. The graph on the right is basically a re-expression of the loads to Tampa Bay in the terms of total nitrogen loads per unit water. So we've seen declines in the amount of nitrogen per unit water entering each of the bay segments for the most part. And those graphs are decreasing. And as I mentioned, we've seen recovery of seagrasses for the most part bay-wide to peak conditions in 2016. But over this last reasonable assurance period, that's where we've started to see a change and started to recognize that there's additional challenges that we need to consider for managing nutrient loads into Tampa Bay. And this graph is kind of re-expressing the paradigm that if we continue to control nutrient loads, the chart on the right is basically whether or not we're meeting water quality standards relative to chlorophyll A and water clarity. And green in this case means good. So 3 of the 4 bay segments, we're in good shape for the most part of meeting water quality targets conducive of seagrass recovery. And it's that one bay segment on Tampa Bay where we've not had we have not been consistently meeting those water quality targets. And as I mentioned, since about 2016, we've seen a significant drop in seagrass resources bay-wide, primarily in the upper bay segments, and I'll kind of break that down a little bit more. But since 2016, we've lost about 11,500 acres of seagrasses to Tampa Bay. So we're about at levels that were observed in the 2006-2008 timeframe, and we've lost that over about 7-year time. So that is alarming to us as a ESHRI program, as resource managers. It should be alarming to you all as resource managers in your respective entities. And that's why we're renewing this call to better and more effectively manage nutrient loads to the bay to get the bay back on track. And we want to reverse that trend that we're seeing in terms of that major seagrass loss. The graphs on the right are basically breaking down where we've lost those seagrasses. The top 2 graphs are Old Tampa Bay and Hillsborough Bay. Note that the Y scales are different for each of these bay segments. So the amount of seagrasses lost are not equal in this case. Old Tampa Bay, we've lost nearly 7,000 acres of seagrass since 2016. Hillsborough Bay, we've lost, I think, about 1,600 acres. In Middle Tampa Bay, we've lost about 1,900 acres, primarily in the upper portions of Middle Tampa Bay. The other bay segments, we've been fairly stable. We've seen some losses in each of the bay segments in the lower part of the bay, but for the most part, the most significant losses have been in Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay, and Upper Middle Tampa Bay. And that's what we're trying to address with this renewed assessment, primarily in Old Tampa Bay to start. That isn't to say that we'll look at these other bay segments, but Old Tampa Bay is where we've lost about 7,000 acres of seagrass, and we need to address the conditions there. And it's sort of area we've been kind of going through the process of working both with the Technical Advisory Committee as well as the Nitrogen Management Consortium to explore why we're seeing these losses. But we know that pyridinium blooms are playing a part. This is a harmful algal bloom that exists during the summer months in Old Tampa Bay, and it's capitalizing probably on both the nutrient loads as well as the physical water quality conditions present in Old Tampa Bay. It tends to bloom in areas of high residence time, and And its peak conditions usually occur around the July, August, and September timeframe. And that's what's been tripping, for the most part, our exceedance of chlorophyll A targets that we've established for the whole Tampa Bay segment. Added on top of that, over the past decade or so, the graph on the left is indicating the different major sources of nitrogen loads in Tampa Bay. The yellow line is non-point sources. We've actually been seeing an increase in non-point source loads in the whole Tampa Bay segment relative to historic conditions, and that is probably a driver of why we're getting these blooms, as well as seeing poor water quality conditions in the whole Tampa Bay segment. Graph on the right basically is just reiterating towards more refined management areas, seagrass management areas where the loss of seagrasses have occurred. And that dark red area represents the Feather Sound region, a shallow tidal flat that can represent up to a couple thousand acres of seagrasses if they exist in that bay segment. And we lost a significant amount of seagrasses that occurred on Feather Sound going back to 2016. So we know those conditions are present in the whole Tampa Bay segment, and we're starting to explore sort of the other influencing factors for that seagrass loss in Old Tampa Bay. Not sure if increasing water temperatures are playing a part of adding stress to continued seagrass recovery in Tampa Bay. We're actually deploying some temperature sensors at the sort of suggestion of Roger Johansson, who's also been doing that work in Middle Tampa Bay, but we're also deploying some temperature sensors in Old Tampa Bay to understand what the max summertime temps are being experienced along those shallow flats in Old Tampa Bay, and seeing if that's an additional stressor that might be affecting seagrass recovery. We know that that hydrology is potentially changing, particularly over the past 10 years with more non-point source loads, as I showed in that prior graph. We know that we have persistent summertime pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay that are probably exacerbating water clarity conditions. And then with that loss of seagrass over this past 7 years, we've seen different macroalgae species, both drift algae and Chlorpis species, sort of invading those lost seagrass areas and probably capitalizing on the nutrients that are now available in that bay segment. We also know that a lot of the entities are exploring long-term plans and additional interventions for both the point sources represented and the non-point sources represented in that watershed. And we've been working with a variety of entities to also explore different bioremediation strategies through additional shellfish restoration, perhaps, in that bay segment as well. So all that combined is sort of setting the stage of what is the next target that we need to sort of shoot for to get that bay segment back on track, to get those persistent seagrass coverage to exist in the Old Tampa Bay segment, not for 1 or 2 years, but for, persistently for decades. And that's what we sort of envision as the estuary program of this nitrogen management assessment 2.0. And as I mentioned, it's going to start in Old Tampa Bay because we've not been meeting numeric nutrient criteria that have been established through a lot of the work that we've done through the estuary program, as well as the nitrogen management consortium, and as recognized by DEP as maintaining reasonable assurance for Tampa Bay. We submitted our last reasonable assurance update to the state back in December of last year. And that reasonable assurance plan basically set up the next stage of assessments that I'm going to be talking about under this RFP that we're going to be putting out on the street. But this is basically going to dictate the work that's needing to be done over the next 5-year or reasonable assurance period that will be inclusive of the years 2022 through 2026. So through that process, we've also embarked on, through each of the nitrogen management consortium entities, signing on to a declaration of cooperation that kind of reiterates a lot of the things I just mentioned, that we're going to embark on this new assessment, and whatever results that occur from this new assessment, we're going to work together to collaboratively meet those in the future. And that might affect permitted levels to each of the entities in the Old Tampa Bay segment as we go through those assessments. May not. We want to do that work as part of this similar capacity assessment, but this declaration is basically trying to keep the band together, because we know that a lot of progress is made when we all work together towards common goals. and whether or not the goals remain the same from those 1990 levels that we first established, or whether or not they should be different based on these new challenges and stressors that this pay segment is experiencing. We want to make sure that we're all committed to the same work to get seagrasses back in Old Tampa Bay. So we've been asking those entities in the Nitrogen Management Consortium to sign on to this declaration through the better part of this year. We've already received, was it 3 at this point, Maya? And I know a lot of our municipal governments are taking it to their boards and councils to get approval to sign on to that. It also allows us to share the resources to get this work accomplished. The RFP that we're anticipating to put out on the street over the next month is going to be fully funded through the estuary program, but the full package, the reasonable assurance update that we're developing and will be delivering to DEP at the tail end of that 5-year period is going to be cost shared through the Nitrogen Management Consortium. So part of that declaration is a commitment of funding to support those assessments. And this is something we've done through the Nitrogen Management Consortium, going back to some of those early reasonable assurance document development, going back to 2002. So I say all that kind of setting the stage for what we envision as this assimilative capacity assessment in Old Tampa Bay. I kind of mentioned a lot of these tasks, but what we're envisioning basically is looking at sort of those complicating factors in Old Tampa Bay and asking the question, does the traditional nutrient management paradigm for that bay segment still hold? Do we need to be more aggressive or look at other sort of resource-based targets or goals that are more appropriate moving forward in that bay segment based on the conditions that we're now experiencing? With that sort of reevaluation of the paradigm, that might require different targets, thresholds, and numeric nutrient criteria, both relative to total loads or hydrologically normalized loads, or chlorophyll A conditions that would be more conducive to support persistent seagrass coverage in Old Tampa Bay. So that's sort of the second task we're envisioning. And then analogous to a little bit of what Jeff was mentioning, task 3 is that we know a lot of work is planned in that bay segment. With implementation of Senate Bill 64, a lot of the existing domestic wastewater treatment plants are figuring out what they're doing with their reclaimed water in that bay segment. So over the now next 9-year time frame, those plans will be implemented by 2032, and that might have an ultimate effect in terms of nutrient loads that are being discharged to the bay, and we want to take that into consideration as well as other planned projects that might have an effect in terms of the cycling of nutrients both internally and externally in that bay segment, as well as the expression of those nutrients in Old Tampa Bay. And there might be other actions that might be complementary to a lot of that work that is being envisioned by the partners represented in this room. There might be additional circulation improvements that could control the expression of nutrients, particularly whether or not hydrargyrum blooms would persist in certain portions of Old Tampa Bay. So we want to take that into account and build that into the assimilative capacity assessment, so that, again, we're all working together towards a common goal. And we know that nutrients are one of the controlling factors, but there's these other sort of complicating factors that are affecting water quality and seagrass recovery, particularly in this Old Tampa Bay segment. And then sort of the last task that I mentioned is, if we come up with different targets or our nutrient load levels that might be more appropriate for future management of this bay segment, that might require us to look at individual permitted sources and then adjust from there. So that's sort of the last task, and we set a fairly aggressive timeline of how we'd like to see this work proceed, and this is to align to some of the work that I mentioned through the Declaration of Cooperation and fitting into the reasonable assurance process that we have to deliver to the state. But over basically the next year, we're looking to get this work accomplished. Based on us sort of factoring in the funding we have available, we're trying to get this out on the streets and advertised and receive proposals over the next month so that we could take it to our boards in August for approval of that contractor, and then basically get the contractor on board at the start of our fiscal year, which is October 1, 2023, and then over the next year work on this that assembly capacity assessment, basically those 4 tasks I outlined. So we're bringing this both to the TAC and the NMC to get your feedback, your fairly quick feedback. I know it's a fairly tight timeline to receive comments, but if you all had comments, we welcome them. The presentation itself, if you click on this top link in the presentation in the TAC agenda, that'll take you to the full RFP. You could review it and provide any additional comments to that. We're looking to advertise fairly short order by Monday of next week, so we'd appreciate any comments by the end of this week. I know, again, this is a tight timeline, and I apologize for that. But this is just sort of the way that the timing played out in terms of bringing this to y'all and the Nitrogen Management Consortium. So I'll stop there. I don't know, Jeff, if you want to add anything else in terms of the comments you had at the start. But this is sort of the vision that we're trying to lay out over the next year. This assessment of capacity assessment will basically be a final report that will be addendum to the reasonable assurance plan that we'll submit to DEP. We committed to that when we submitted the last reasonable assurance plan, and the department signed off on this process. So that's why I said we're trying to be fairly aggressive to get this work done and then deliver that report by the end of December 2024 to the department. And that, again, will set the stage for how we'll implement the reasonable assurance plan over the next 5 years, and perhaps look at adjustments to NT allocations if necessary. That comes about based on the new targets, thresholds, and potentially criteria or TMDLs that might come out of this work.
Yeah, so I guess I jumped to the punchline, sorry.
It's all good.
Maybe could provide a little additional foundation there. When we were working through this process of these 2 final orders and getting this stuff so that FDP could oversee it, I was always concerned that based on the land bridge, the 3 land bridges we have in Old Tampa Bay, that we were exceeding the assemblative capacity of Old Tampa Bay. But in an effort to get this all out there and get everybody permitted and keep us on track with the reasonable assurance, we move forward on that. Correspondingly, I'm not convinced that we're not way under the assemblative capacity of some of the others because of the flushing capacity, unfortunately, of our channel that allows these big ships to come in and out of Tampa Bay. So you can look at some of these hydrologic models, you'll see that every other bay segment flushes like in 72 hours or less, and the portions of Old Tampa Bay, particularly above the Courtney Campbell, flush maybe in 140 days. So the bay was broken down in the original TMDL into 4 bay segments. This was not something that was considered. We wrote the final orders in 4 bay segments as well, so that we can open them up and not expose the other 3 bay. We can open up 1 without exposing the other 3 bay segments if that ever became necessary. We could also potentially change how we look at this bay segment. This is sort of the Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other, and address this hydrologic circulation issue specifically in this bay segment without necessarily affecting the other permitted entities and blowing up the whole system, which we do not want to do. We allocated all loads when we went through this process. We did not leave anything left on the table to help out. We also hydrologically normalize these loads, which seems to have been very effective in the other 3 bay segments where we do have good flushing, but it doesn't seem to have worked so well in this bay segment because it shows us to be in compliance with the requirements, except when it comes to water quality, which is where, the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So I just want to say that these land bridges that we have here certainly seem like the X factor for this bay segment in particular. When I look at the water quality in the other 3 bay segments and lay them against the seagrass losses we've seen in those bay segments, those seem maybe more driven by increased shipping traffic in and out of the Port of Tampa and wave run up associated with that shipping traffic. We've seen a lot of increases in the last 10 years to that shipping traffic. And we've seen changes in water elevation. So between those two things, I'm more convinced that that may be what we're seeing in those other bay segments. This one is about circulation in my mind. And therefore, I think it's really critical that we get a model that, like I said earlier, has a much finer level of discretization, can address some of those circulation issues and potentially be expandable in the event we really need this in the other bay segments. So those would be the things I would hope that we could look at when you guys provide comment on the project scope and evaluation criteria.
So I was just wondering, have you been talking with FDOT about these concerns?
Yes.
Because I didn't notice that anybody from them was here this morning.
Yeah, they're part of the Nitrogen Management Consortium. There was a low bridge constructed in 2018 on the Courtney Campbell Causeway to address water quality concerns north of there. We think that other potential causeway alterations should be explored. We just haven't made as much headway on the other bridge expanses at this point.
And, you know, that doesn't change the fact that if these causeways stay, then we're still in the same position we're in now. And what tools do we have at our disposal to address the seagrass losses that we're observing? So does that mean we need to reduce the nitrogen load that's coming into that bay segment, or are there other complementary kinds of actions that we can do? And these are sort of the questions that we're kind of asking everyone to collectively grapple with. Yeah.
And while their policy recently changed after Ian and the issues down south, there's no removing these land bridges in the time frame we need to address the concerns we're seeing in Old Tampa Bay. I mean, once we got pyridinium in there, it's in deep trouble, y'all, honestly. And I'm a civil engineer, and I can see it. So, do we need to get rid of the land bridges? Yes. Is that something that's going to happen in the next couple of years? No. Is that going to happen in 10 years? Probably not. They just finished, they're on their way to expanding the Howard Franklin, and there's no change in the circulation, particularly on the west side of Old Tampa Bay on that roadway. We got shot down on that when Ed and the estuary program asked to have additional openings on the west end of the Howard Franklin. But honestly, it starts at the Gandy as well. I mean, every single one of them is a major constriction, Courtney Campbell being the worst, to the circulation of Old Tampa Bay.
So like I said, there's a link to the full scope in my presentation. I think
it's also linked in the agenda as the draft RFP link. And
take a look at that and provide comments. We do ask, if you're intending to bid on this work, that you don't provide us comments, obviously, if you're an entity that are considering bidding on this work. But we wanted to open this up to both the TAC and NMC to provide comments on the overall intent of the project, and recognizing what Jeff just said, we'll go back this week and tweak it a little bit. Our ultimate goal is to put it out on the street next Monday.
Question, so maybe I'm not a chemist or biologist, but are all forms of nitrogen relevant to the blooms? Because you have, I mean, I just don't know. I mean, is it like the nitrogen from car exhaust is different than the nitrogen in the fertilizer, at least the molecular forms, right? So which ones are particularly, do we even know which ones are particularly related?
Yeah, Carrie Lopez with FWI has done some of that work, and that goes to whether or not the expression of the targets and thresholds still needs to remain as total nitrogen. Might be a different target that we need to shoot for, and at that point, how do we allocate to that nutrient species that might be the driver of water quality conditions in the basic.
And we basically haven't had to consider that today because we haven't had non-compliance that put us into a position where we needed to start looking at. I mean, all the domestic wastewater plants basically produce 100% organic nitrogen unless they're secondary. So all those direct discharges typically run around 2 milligrams per liter, and it is 100% organic. If it's in Old Tampa Bay, it probably has plenty of time to convert. If it's in Middle or Lower or Manatee River, it probably doesn't convert in Tampa Bay, basically. It converts somewhere, but not in Tampa Bay.
Carrie, did you want to add anything? No?
I mean, I think it's an important question, but because the different forms of nitrogen are important, but if the model is not modeling those different components, I'm not sure. And that allocations can't be.
Yeah, under the work we outlined, there are some existing tools that we've used to manage nutrient loads today. Jeff mentioned empirical model. We've also developed an Old Tampa Bay integrated ecosystem model that does take into consideration some of the nutrient forms. We have not specifically set targets to those different forms of nutrients, though. And that's, goes to your question, Steve, of what is the appropriate nutrient species we should be managing for in Old Tampa Bay to have the best water quality improvements or sustain water quality conducive for seagrass. We haven't got up to that level, but we do have tools that should be able to get us to that level, and hopefully this work will illuminate some of that work.
I do have a question about, I saw in the text there that accounting for internal and external loads, and I know there had been discussion in the past about internal, I think, anyway, there was discussion about nitrogen from sediments, and I think with the blooms, when they are being deposited in the sediments in the form of cysts, we have, this buildup of organic matter, and I wasn't sure if that was something that you're targeting in this, or how you target or to include.
If you ask my staff, I usually like to ask for a lot. So within the scope is fairly comprehensive. I don't know if we have all the tools available to fully understand internal nutrient cycling, but it is a part of the proposal right now.
And if you have specific suggestions related to that element, just please, flesh them out in comments in the document. It would be really helpful for us.
Also, look, this work will also complement some of what came out of the research plan under the Old Tampa Bay Actionable Science Project as well for some of those research questions. I feel like this could be complementary work to those needed assessments.
I think we could spend the whole meeting talking about this issue, this challenge. It's sort of like we're starting a new chapter of bay restoration and bay management. It feels very much like early days of what I would imagine the estuary program felt like in the 1990s. People ask us, what's going on, what's causing it? Like, we don't have all of those answers, and those are things we're gonna have to grapple with together as a community, and then we're gonna have to chart this path forward. So this is just one opportunity for you all to help us think these things through, ask these questions, and develop a document that hopefully gets some expertise to help us move at least like the next set of questions forward. So
I think Mai's absolutely right on that. I mean, I think another thing that's really different about this bay segment is atmospheric deposition, but I would not ask us to look at that as well. Those Noreen Poor's work at USF suggested that we see significant atmospheric deposition into this bay segment based on the traffic sitting on those three bridges during the week. So, but you're starting to get into issue, beyond what I believe, like Maya said, is the next step. How do we get from potentially this really big grid that we've been looking at down to a really small grid to start seeing where is this stuff coming from?
Yeah, and I think at the last TAC meeting, we talked about a little bit of the work that Mary Lusk is doing to look at atmospheric deposition and how those forms of nitrogen are being used by Karenia and Pyridinium. So I think we're sort of nudging those questions forward as well. But just sort of in the context of the things we're going to be talking about later in this meeting in terms of research priorities and sort of charting out the path of work that needs to be done over the next 5 years, atmospheric deposition and getting sensors close, thinking those things. I mean, these are the kinds of challenges we're going to be needing to work through over the next 5 years as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we can't do it all in this one RFP, with you.
Yeah.
All right, that was really helpful. Like I said, we're sorry for the fast turnaround, but if you can take a quick look, it's less than 10 pages, and provide us any comments by Friday, we would really appreciate your help on thinking through some of these things.
And Ed, how are you taking, is that me?
You, yes, Mark.
So are you, how are you taking comments? Is it editable online?
I think we have it set up right now so that anyone can provide comments. I can go in and change if you want to request editing privileges directly, or if you just want to email Ed and I, that's fine. We'll take them however we can get them. But the extent to which you're comfortable and able to work in a Google Doc, that's the easiest for us.
Because you're right, sometimes it's view only, it's edit capable, suggesting.
Yeah, and if I don't have the permission set up right, just put that request out there or send me an email saying, you bumped up the permissions and I'll fix it, I promise. All right, our next topic is with Sheila Sclero, and she's going to be talking about our Trash Free Waters project.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
We do have coffee in the back. It's so great to see all of you in person. This is actually my first TAC since I've been with the program, and I personally think we should have more of these, just putting that out there. But today I just wanted to give y'all a brief overview of our Trash Free Waters project that we've been working on at the Estuary Program over the last couple of years, specifically talking about the development and implementation of a litter management plan template. I know there are several organizations in our watershed, including private universities, as well as local municipalities that are kind of pursuing their own trash-free waters projects. So I really just wanted to make sure that you are all aware of the work that we've been doing, and make sure that you're aware of the assets and the materials that we've created so that you can use those and leverage those in your projects moving forward. Hold on, sorry, I'm struggling.
Use the arrow.
Oh, use the arrow, okay. One moment, please. Oh, okay, so I just click it? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, got it, user error. So I think at this point, we're all pretty aware that 80% of marine debris originates from land-based sources. And as a result of that, the EPA has developed this Trash Free Waters initiative, which helps to provide funding for these trash free waters projects all across the United States. So this initiative is really designed to reduce marine debris by physically removing trash from our local waterways. It also works to prevent new trash from entering our waterways and invests in research to help us understand the sources of marine debris. So at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, we received a Trash Free Waters grant in the 2020, so right about when I started with the program. And for our project, we've been working with 5 community organizations around the Gulf of Mexico. So we've been working with another national estuary program, the Mobile Bay National Estuary Program, based out of Alabama. We've also been working with Osprey Initiative, which is a private company that focuses all of their effort on trash collection and removal. They're also based out of Alabama. And then we've also been working with our local Keep America affiliates. So Keep Tampa Bay Beautiful, Keep Pinellas Beautiful, and Keep Manatee Beautiful. So for our project goals, we were really tasked with working with our partners to create this comprehensive strategy to reduce trash pollution across the Gulf of Mexico. And really what we've been doing is we've been working with folks to actually install these trash collection devices to directly remove trash from our streams and creeks within the Tampa Bay watershed. We've been expanding the use of trash data to help inform our trash management and prevention policies. And then we've also been working with the community to make sure they are informed about the trash issues in our area and across the Gulf of Mexico, as well as engaging them in actual removal and prevention projects. And really the culmination of all of this work will be the development of a community litter management and reduction plan template for the entire Gulf of Mexico region. So in working with our partners, we've installed 12 different trash collection devices and have been maintaining them over the last couple of years. So we decided to go with 3 different types of trash collection devices. So we installed 3 litter getters. So if those of you, if you're not familiar with a litter getter, it's in the bottom left-hand corner. Was designed by Osprey Initiative, and it basically looks like a trash pontoon boat, in my opinion. We've also deployed 6 water goats, which I think most of us are familiar with. These are kind of the boom type structures that we see kind of around stormwater outfalls leading into Tampa Bay and some of our creeks and streams. That's pictured in the middle. And then we also deployed 3 sea-bins, which is pictured on the right, and those look like floating trash cans. They're mainly installed in marinas around the area just because they fill up much quicker than some of the other devices do. So we deployed these 12 collection devices in both Manatee, Hillsborough, and Pinellas counties. So our devices were cleaned and maintained by the Keep America affiliates and their volunteers, and they were cleaned out approximately monthly. However, following major rain events like we had this morning, these devices are cleaned out to make sure that to remove anything that's been caught, because oftentimes after a rain event, these devices become really full. So ad hoc cleanouts were done as needed. So once all of the trash was removed, 10% of the trash collected was categorized and quantified to help us understand the different sources and pathways contributing to marine debris in our area. And then all of the data collected was collected using a modified EPA-approved Escaped Trash Assessment Protocol, or as we like to call it, ETAP. So we used a slightly modified version of the Escaped Trash Assessment Protocol. What's really great about this protocol is that all of the programs across the country that are using or that are collecting trash data as part of the Trash Free Waters Initiative, they're all using the same protocol or a slightly modified version. So it's really creating this great data set of trash collected in these various regions of the country. So for ours, like I said, 10% of the trash that was collected was categorized and quantified first by material. So is it metal, plastic, paper, etc. And then it was further subdivided by product type. So think of plastic bottles, beer cans, chip bags, things like that. And then finally, it was further subdivided by the item's condition. So is it intact? Can you see the product's label? Is it partially degraded, where you can kind of see the label, but it's not really easily visible? Or is it heavily degraded with barnacles growing all over it? So this, by documenting the condition, it gives us an idea of whether this is latent trash or new trash that is now entering the waterways. So once the products or the trash is actually separated, then we record any product names to help us understand, are there specific brands that are finding their way into the waterways more than others, like maybe Wawa or Coca-Cola cans. Just throwing that out there, that's not real. And then we also took the weight of all of the separated categories and then also recorded how many were the counts of the individual products in each specific category. So all of this, the scope of, or the SOP, as well as all of the data sheets are available. They are at TechPub, so you can quickly find it in our library. You can also find it on the trash-free water section of our website if you're interested. So this is a participatory science project. So all of the data was collected by our Keep America affiliates and their volunteers. So these folks aren't typically trained scientists like many of you are. So we incorporated and established several QA/QC protocols throughout the data collection process. Outside of normal QA/QC protocols like double checking data entry and double checking weights and counts, things like that, we also held an annual group training event. So this is very similar to our Seagrass Transect training event, for those of you that are familiar with that. But basically, we brought all of the different groups collecting data together. We collected trash and removed trash out of a collection device and then separated it as a team into those specific categories. And so this was a great opportunity for folks that were collecting trash to ask questions, to clarify certain procedures, as well as for us to talk as a group, to talk through certain problems that folks have been encountering throughout the data collection process. So in addition to that, we also worked with an intern from a local Girl Scouts troop, and who helped us develop this escaped trash assessment protocol. So this was really valuable, especially for our Keep America affiliates, for them to train their volunteers, as well as brush up on protocols themselves before they go out in the field and collect additional data. So this protocol is available, or this training video is available on our YouTube page for those who are interested. And then to streamline data collection, QA process, and data analysis, we did develop a data collection portal. Again, this is very similar to our Seagrass data collection portal for those of you who use that. So we worked with the Water Atlas to develop this. This is still active, so if anybody is working on their own trash-free waters project, or if you clean out specific water goats or certain devices, and you want to utilize this, this is available for you guys to use. Just come talk to me and we can get you set up with a device and a location and a login. So up next, for this project, we are going to continue data analysis. So as of now, Marcus Beck, our program scientist, has developed a high-level assessment of the trash data, which you can access on our GitHub page. So this basically is very high level, so what types of debris were collected at specific locations, things like that. We've also been working with graduate students across the state of Florida, doing these micro internships to develop new insights into the different into our trash data. So these two figures on the right were actually developed by one of our micro internships, interns, Harishima. So this top one shows the distribution of the materials that were collected in all of the trash collection devices. And what you can see, the dark gray is plastic, so the majority, over 75% of, almost 75% of the material collected was plastic, which I don't think is anything too shocking for most of us. In addition, we're also going to be working with Mobile Bay National Estuary Program to continue developing and implementing this community litter management plan template. So this will act as a guide for any organization that is looking to establish trash abatement projects across the Gulf of Mexico. So the plan will incorporate and identify strategies to help folks assess marine debris in their local and respective waterways. It will describe how to establish an ETAP monitoring program in their region. It'll guide community outreach and involvement in these abatement and removal strategies. And then it'll also provide some cost and logistic estimates for plan implementation. And so this plan will include both case studies from our watershed as well as the Mobile Bay National Estuary Program's watershed. So to give you an idea of our timeline, as I mentioned, in 2020, we were awarded this grant. Starting in fall of 2021, we started installing and collecting all of our trash data. And then as of January 1st of 2023, our data collection has completed. So we are now this summer going to continue working with select interns to try and see if we can uncover new insights into the trash data. And then by fall of 2023, we will be submitting a final draft litter management plan template for EPA to approve. So I basically just wanted to give you an idea of what we've been working on and make you available of all of these resources, hopefully inspire you to go for a Trash Free Waters project yourself or a Trash Free Waters grant yourself. But if you are collecting trash or want to start collecting trash, a trash program in your regions or your municipalities, please feel free to utilize all of the products that we've created. These are all for you to use. I also want to point out the data download. I've already been asked by a couple folks on our TAC for the actual data that we collected. So all of that can be downloaded on our GitHub page. And if you have issues accessing it, please reach out to myself or Marcus. And with that, very high level, I will take any questions if there are any. Cool, yes.
So you indicated you're working with like the local Keep America Beautiful litter programs.
Yes.
Is this something that could be implemented by a civic association and like up in the upper parts of the Tampa Bay watershed?
Absolutely, absolutely. I definitely think, I mean, the foundation is there, the assets are all there, and we'd be happy to work with the civic association. It would basically just be them, if they have a water goat or some type of device nearby, it would just be them kind of adopting that and committing to emptying it out once a month or on whatever schedule works for them. But absolutely, we want the community involved in this. Community is essential to what we do at the estuary program. So if you know of any civic organizations.
Or HOAs, I was even thinking about that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think the main reason we partnered with the Keep America Beautiful affiliates is because many of the local governments kind of have a requirement if you're doing something on their property, right? You have to.
I just thought about that.
And they're a logical partner for us too, so it makes sense. But this would be great to scale out to community associations like that.
Yeah, that's why when I said civic association, when she mentioned the waterways, I'm like, yeah, that wouldn't work if the waterways in Hillsborough County, but at a civic or at a homeowners association where they have multiple ponds, it might work.
Definitely.
And our Keep America affiliates do have a lot of those organizations as their partners. So we kind of went through them and then they helped and incorporated those volunteer groups. So, great.
Sheila, I've got a quick question. Great
Yes,
presentation, thank you. I guess two questions I have. I'm familiar with the other two devices. Could you briefly explain how the C bin works?
The C bin is kind of like a skimmer type of device where it basically just sucks water in and it kind of pulls it through, is my understanding of it. It did not work well here. If I will put that out there, that was the one device that we had a lot of challenges with throughout the grant. It became foul very quickly, it sucked in too much seagrass rack and then it would get clogged. So from what lessons learned, I would not recommend sea-bins in our area.
Is it electrically, I've never seen it.
Yeah, it has
so-
a motor on
Oh,
it.
I see.
Yeah, it has a motor on it.
Motors and
So
saltwater
the
don't-
issue was the motor, that was my understanding, was that the motor would get clogged or.
Yeah, we don't.
And those recommendations, sort of like what we found by installing these 3 different types, will be in that overall final report.
Sure. Yeah,
And
no,
so
that's-
you'll get a version of the draft to review later this summer.
That's useful information. Sheila, my second question was, does the state still have the Clean Marina program, and if would be any opportunity to possibly piggyback or integrate into some of that?
Yes, they do have the Clean Marina program, and we can definitely reach out to them. I haven't specifically talked with them. I don't know, Maya.
We spoke, Ed and I spoke with them sort of at the beginning of this project, so it's probably time to follow back up and see if there's any opportunities to collaborate.
Cool. I'll put you in touch. We've got a marine debris coordinator in our Southeast Regional office here. I'll put you in touch with them. I forget their names. So.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks, Sheila.
Natasha.
The community litter plan, would that be an opportunity to kind of bring some of these smaller scale up to larger scale interested parties together? Or would that just be more of a guidance plan? Like, would there be any accountability or buy-in to that? Is there a way to that?
I think for the plan, it's more just developing kind of a template and incorporating our case studies, our lessons learned, what worked for us and what has not worked for Mobile Bay, so that other organizations that are interested in pursuing something like this will have that document and those kind of lessons learned, so they don't have to make the same mistakes.
I think from the affiliates and partners that we work with, usually the challenge is the sustained maintenance commitment by those entities. So if we can overcome that sort of barrier, then the smaller organizations are great partners. We just need a sustained maintenance commitment for the devices.
And I think, so some of we'll have more evidence and lessons learned to think about how to shape programs going forward. Right now, we get a lot of grant proposals, particularly to like our mini grant program, but also to the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund, where people want to do work in this kind of sphere, but we don't have a lot of evidence and guidance for them at this point. And so, now we'll at least have a starting point to make some of those recommendations and to evaluate proposals against, and then, we can think about what a community-based program would look like into the future. Yeah. Natasha.
So our monitoring program, we have anecdotal, I'll say for lack of a better word right now, comments where I'm already gonna try to encourage people to say escaped trash. I think that's phenomenal. But is there any interest if we could provide, information where it's been documented a little less numerically or generally in like a reported data set over, the past 20 years where people just said, hey, there's trash at this site and we've sampled the site. Is there a possibility or interest in maybe adding to what you're doing more acutely now?
Is it like in the comments from your field?
Mm-hmm. But, we could easily tease it out.
It's a test for Marcus to mine.
I'll reach out. We would have to pilot it to see if it's
And then see if there's a way we can be more regimented going forward
Yeah.
about how you note those things.
Yeah, because
And
there
then
could
how we
be a
scrape it.
emerging priority if there's specific, at least in our program where we have fixed sites or something where, oh, the site always has trash, maybe that's a priority or something.
Thanks. Thanks, Natasha. That was good feedback. Any other comments or questions for Sheila? Okay.
Thank you.
So our next presentation is about a new project that our policy board recommended for funding through the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund. It is a applied research project and a participatory community science project looking at vertical oyster gardens. And our review committee, one of their suggestions in recommending this project for funding was to make sure that they took the study design to you all as our technical advisory committee so that they could incorporate any suggestions before they start doing the research project itself, so they could incorporate your suggestions into the study design. So Olivia's going to talk to you a little bit about what they had in mind, and then you'll have an opportunity to weigh in with any thoughts and additional considerations for them.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. As Maya said, my name is Olivia, and I'm the Gulf Shellfish Institute's Scientific Outreach Coordinator. Now, if you're not familiar with the Gulf Shellfish Institute, we are a nonprofit organization founded in the Tampa Bay area that focuses on the production of shellfish in the Gulf region. And so we're really excited to talk about advancing vertical oyster gardens here in the Tampa Bay National Estuary. Okay, maybe this won't work. That's okay. You got excited for no reason. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, so I know many of us are very familiar with oyster reefs already, but just as kind of a high-level overview, oyster reefs provide a variety of different services here for us in the Tampa Bay area. So one of them being habitat for marine organisms. So they provide habitat for a variety of fish, invertebrate, and bird species. They also serve as shoreline stabilization and erosion control, which is incredibly important for us here in Florida as we consider many of the tropical storms that we face and really making more resilient shorelines. They also are really important for water filtration. So oysters filter phytoplankton, and in doing so, they help to remove a lot of the nitrogen, phosphate, and other nutrients that are found in the water column. And in doing so, they help with a lot of nutrient storage and mitigation. Okay, I'm hitting the arrow, but I guess it's not. Maybe I need to be back here. Okay. All right, that's okay. So one of the biggest things that we know is that that oyster reefs are in big danger. So they are one of the world's most degraded marine ecosystems. And a study a few years ago found that over the last 150 years, 85% of our oyster reefs were lost globally. So that's a pretty stark number, and especially when we consider a lot of the ecosystems we typically think is degraded, like tropical rainforests and coral reefs. Typically, oyster reefs tend to be a little understudied in terms of how we can help to restore them. So that's why it's really important what we're doing here in the Tampa Bay area, particularly to not only help with the resilience of our oyster reefs here, but also for helping to contribute to some of those restoration techniques that can be applied in other places around the world. Okay, this thing just hates me, so we're just going to use therapies. Okay, so there are a variety of different oyster restoration methods that are used here in the Tampa Bay area. On the left side, you're going to see more of the artificial ways that we're doing that. So one of them is oyster shell bags. So that's where we use oyster culch to serve as this nice substrate for oyster larvae or spat to settle on. We also can use different substrates like cinder blocks or lime rock. And so there's been a lot of studies that have been done to try to see what's the best substrate to prevent biofouling, but to really elevate oyster settlement. And then on the left-hand column, these are probably ones that you're a little bit more familiar with. So these oyster reef balls, which are made out of concrete and then deployed along shorelines to help attract some of those oyster larvae to settle. And then lastly, the one we're going to be talking about today is a really novel method that has been increasing in popularity over the last few years called vertical oyster gardens. Now, what these are essentially oyster shell that has been recycled and then strung from these lines, and they can be deployed from somebody's seawall or dock. And so it's a really great way to help soften a lot of our shorelines. So vols are really increasing in popularity here in Tampa Bay. So the Tampa Bay Estuary Program has partnered with Manatee County and has a great program where if somebody's interested in acquiring a vertical oyster garden for their own backyard, they can request that online and then have a box that has that already set up and ready for them to pick up and then deploy at home with all the proper instructions. The news is really picking up on that because as we're concerned about harmful algal blooms here in Florida, that's one of the methods that may be useful for helping to improve water quality. And then there's also local organizations like the Oyster Boys Conservation Organization that has really been getting engaged. You can see they have over 1,000 followers just locally on Instagram. So they go out to schools, retirement homes, really looking at people at all age groups to get them excited about oyster restoration here in Tampa Bay. But we really don't know too much about bogs as a management tool. So there's a couple of pros and cons that we can really think about. Some of these pros can, the first one being that they are a popular community-led initiative. So when we think a lot about really having sustainable restoration methods, we really want some of these things to be community driven because we want to see their investment not only in particular methods of restoration, but also in all the incredible organizations that are represented here and the work that you're doing. They're also really fast and easy to make and deploy. They make really easy workshops for people to come out and get their hands on these restoration methods. They also soften hardened shorelines and introduce a little bit more natural material to the marine environments than some other methods like concrete. But there's some cons, right? Like they use limited resources. So mulch can be pretty expensive. So we really don't know whether we should be investing all of this mulch into these vertical oyster gardens. There's also no data on their effectiveness or how long they last. Some people say they can last about a year or two, but once they get too big, a lot of times they will snap from the lines that they're holding on. And so we really don't know if they are a long-term solution. And of course, they're not easy to monitor. While it's great that the public is involved with this, this also really requires that we have their engagement long-term to understand how these bogs are developing over time. So that is where our program or our project comes in. So we have three main objectives of this project. The first is, of course, we want to increase bog distribution by building bog boxes and hosting workshops. So this is really just getting more bogs in the hands of the public. So that's one of the overarching ones that will be kind of playing into these other two that we're going to talk about. But these are really the ones that we're looking to get feedback on today. So we're going to be measuring oyster water filtration rates in situ or in the field, and really getting an idea of how bogs may be useful in nutrient mitigation. And we're also going to be engaging the public in a community science program. So this is where we're going to really be requesting their input over an extended period of time of how their vertical oyster gardens are developing. So now just to kind of bring this back a little bit to where oysters are typically found in Tampa Bay. Oysters are on a variety of different substrates, but naturally they're usually found in these reefs that you see on the left-hand side. So you can see these concrete domes that we're deploying look a little bit more similar to an oyster reef. But they also can be found on mangrove prop roots. Now, there's not been too much done in the literature that really gives us an idea of how oysters on mangroves are helping to contribute to filtration. So that's where it's going to be really important for us to compare our vertical oyster gardens to these other substrates to get an idea of how these filtration rates compare. Now, there has been a little bit of work done here in the Tampa Bay area getting really great estimates of where these oysters are located around Tampa Bay, but one particular study I want to highlight was done by Michael Drexler in 2008 and 2009. And what they found, or what he found, was that when he was going out, he saw that densities of oysters tended to be a lot higher on mangroves, but ultimately they were a little bit smaller than those that were found on reefs. So what we're also going to be capturing with this project is an idea of how does potential size and like the substrate that these oysters are found on, how could that potentially contribute to water filtration? So that's another really good, that shows why scientifically we should really be investing and looking at substrate also when we're looking at water filtration. So that leads us to our question of how does the in situ water filtration rate of the eastern oyster on vertical oyster gardens compare to natural reference substrates, meaning our oyster reefs and our mangrove prop roots? So this is where we're really going to be looking for your feedback today. So we have designed a novel method that will be used to help assess oyster filtration rates in the field on a variety of substrates. Now, one of the challenges of measuring oyster filtration rates is historically, a lot of these measurements are done in the lab, which means very controlled environmental variables. And also they typically use 1 or 2 phytoplankton species that can be easily cultured and used to measure that filtration. But it really doesn't take into account all of the different species that phytoplankton may be filtering and how that could potentially play a role in that rate. And so in the left-hand panel, you see a nice full vertical oyster garden that we would consider to be very successful. And in the next panel, you see the cylinder is representative of a big PVC pipe. Now that PVC pipe is going to be capped on the end, and that little apparatus that you see on the side is essentially just a valve that we'll be using that will allow us to take water samples with a syringe. So that cylinder or that PVC will be placed underneath the oyster garden, and it'll be capturing the water within it. So that gives you a kind of momentary pause of what assemblages are found in the water right around that at that time. And so then we'll be suspending it from the dock, which is where you see the 2 ropes, and we'll be using different flotation devices to help keep it afloat. And then at specific time intervals, we're going to be taking water samples to get an idea of how the phytoplankton counts and the community that is present may be changing. So we'll take an initial sample, get an understanding of which phytoplankton species are present and how many are there. And then we're still working out how long we're going to be taking those samples for. That's something that will be very experimental. In the beginning is seeing whether it's every hour, every couple of hours. We're going to be really getting an idea of how many water samples we'd like to take as we kind of see how this goes. But essentially what we'd be able to measure is over time, primarily within a day, how does that phytoplankton assemblage change within that apparatus. So obviously that apparatus works really well for vertical oyster garden, but we're going to need to manipulate it for the different substrates that it's going to be deployed on. So on the left-hand side, you see an oyster reef, and the biggest challenge there is the hard substrate of those reefs. And so instead of having the cap on the bottom, we're going to have a piece of steel on the bottom that's serrated. And so that way you can get it into the substrate, manipulate it in, and really encapsulate the water at high tide that would be coming up around that oyster reef. In the right panel, you see a mangrove prop root. And so that is, again, we're going to be trying to keep it pretty afloat with different, probably going to use pool noodles or things like that to try to keep it towards the surface. But again, keeping it stabilized on a mangrove branch. And over time, again, taking the sample. So right now we have 3 different sites within the Tampa Bay area that we will be deploying these devices on all of these different substrates. And we're hoping to get at least 8 measurements per substrate per site. So that'll give us a nice robust data set to work with in terms of getting an estimate of how these vertical oyster gardens really compare to these natural substrates. Now you may be wondering how we're going to count all of these different phytoplankton. Traditionally, you'd have to sit for many hours under a microscope and do this, but now there are a lot of very accessible tools like this Planktoscope that you see right here. This is a very low cost, efficient way that you can measure phytoplankton. And so what it essentially is a microscope that you can build, and as you run the water samples through it, they have a software program that you can hook up to an iPad that will give you real-time estimates of which species are present and how many are there. And then that all logs all that information for you online so that you can do all the analyses that you'd like later on. Now, when we think about also how bogs are helping with ecosystem services as a whole, we also want to think about nutrient services as well that they may be contributing to. So another thing we're going to be looking at is bog harvest a suitable nutrient mitigation strategy. Now, if you're not too familiar with how some of these nutrients work within the marine ecosystem, essentially what's happening is these oysters, as they're filtering their phytoplankton, they are removing excess nitrogen and phosphate that are consumed in this phytoplankton into their bodies, and they're simulating it into their growth. So as they get bigger and bigger, they're taking more nitrogen into their bodies. Now, there are some ways that nitrogen can get back into the marine ecosystem, and that can be through excretion or egestion through their pseudofeces. But for the most part, most of that nitrogen is being captured in their bodies. So what we really want to do is develop a way to see if by taking these vertical oyster gardens, once they get nice and full and get a little bit too large potentially even to keep if those deployment methods that we've been using in the past are too heavy for them. One thing that we could be doing is actually taking those vertical oyster gardens out of the water, harvesting them, and so essentially breaking them down, and then seeing if in the long term, if that's a way we can kind of like keep recycling those shells back into those vertical oyster gardens, making new ones, and kind of just keeping the cycle going of removing excess nitrogen. So the way that we're going to really measure this is we're going to be taking vertical oyster gardens at different stages. So we're going to develop our own scale where we're going to look at a vertical oyster garden that may not be very successful, may have a lot of biofouling on it. So consider that not very successful vertical oyster garden, and then have stages all the way up into a very successful oyster garden, which is primarily oysters. And then from each of those classes, we're going to take samples from them. We'll deconstruct them, grind them up, dry them, and send them off to another lab that will do all of our analyses for us to give us an idea of the total nitrogen content within those samples. So obviously, getting all of these vertical oyster gardens is going to be quite a challenge. And so we want to really give the public an opportunity to invest in this with us and help deploy vertical oyster gardens around the Tampa Bay area. Now, if you have a moment, that QR code will link you to a citizen science program log that essentially is our participant input log that they can fill out when they first sign up for our program. And so what we really want to do is not only increase interest in vertical oyster gardens, but really get people invested in oyster restoration in all of its many forms here in Tampa Bay. And so by doing that, when we are at our workshops, we will have this nice QR code for people to scan. And then I'll also have this at the end if you did not get it up yet. But This is kind of what it looks like right here. So there's a couple of different questions that we'll have. These are just a few of them, but essentially we'll ask them where they're installing their vertical oyster garden, what kind of substrate they're putting it on, whether it's their own dock or seawall. And then over time, over a year, we're going to ask them for different photos of that vertical oyster garden. So we'll have them take an initial photo of where they deploy it, and then at a 6-month time period and a 12-month time period, we'll ask them to pull that vertical oyster garden out of the water and give us an estimate, just kind of give us some photos of that so we can estimate what is growing on them. We're also really hoping to create great relationships with the community through this program so that they may want to be more invested in the program than just taking these photos. So as a scientific outreach coordinator, I will be following up with these participants and asking if we can go out and take additional environmental measurements like salinity, temperature, nutrient measurements, so we can really see how vertical oyster gardens at different stages, at different places around the Tampa Bay area fare in terms of their growth and development. And so through all of these different aspects of this project, we're really hoping to increase public engagement and education on the benefits of oysters to Tampa Bay. We also want to have an evaluation of whether vaults are an effective management tool. We're obviously investing a lot of time and money through a lot of different organizations that we've partnered with to get these in the water, but we want to see, should we be continuing to really use this as a primary form of restoration? Or are we, is this really just a great public outreach tool that can be used to engage people? We're also going to have an assessment of the ecosystem services that vertical oyster gardens provide compared to natural reference substrates, which that'll be really exciting because that'll be some novel work to see how restored oysters really fare compared to oyster reefs and mangrove properties. And lastly, we're really hoping to have a sustainable, replicable structure for a long-term vertical oyster garden community science program. And I showed you that photo or that image of that map of all of the oyster populations that are in decline around the world, really just to give you an idea of where this project could take us. Obviously, we're really focused on the Tampa Bay estuary and making sure this is successful here. But one of the great things is we would love to have this program be something that could be distributed to other people around the country and in places around the world who may be interested in doing something similar. So ultimately, we're really hoping to create a framework for people to use this as a great management tool. With that, I'd love to thank all of our incredible partners who have been part of putting together this proposal. And we're really excited to get to work with everybody who is here today and also part of these organizations. And with that, I will take any questions or feedback. Thank you so much.
So have there been any considerations or discussions about coastal permitting incentives or drawbacks as far as like when you want to build a dock, replace a dock, something like that, where I'm imagining a lot of these would be implemented? Could there be potential incentives if you have an active, or could there be potential limitations in the future as far as you can't replace the stock because this is excelling nitrogen reduction, area? Or is there, again, the opportunity to, support specific projects in priority areas because of some of this? Just curious.
That's a really great perspective and one that I honestly hadn't considered. I think the biggest thing that we're trying to kind of approach through this proposal is the fact that we really don't know too much about whether these are actually contributing that much to any of these ecosystem services that we're measuring. But I think in the long term, that could be a really great perspective. I mean, one of the benefits of the vertical oyster gardens is they can be moved and transported. So I couldn't see there being any limitations of you can't destroy the dock unless that's the primary purpose of that dock. But I do think that would be really interesting to think about incentives moving forward for people to deploy these, whatever that may look like in terms of, governments. But I think that's a really good perspective that maybe hopefully this could lead to something that would be beneficial.
What's the quality and marketability of the oysters?
That is a good question, and I don't think anybody has really looked at that. I'm also going to defer to the executive director of GSI. I don't think there's anything that has
You
been.
mean in terms of food?
Yeah.
Well,
Any other?
we would have to make it very clear to the participants that shellfish harvesting is only permitted within certain areas for the health and safety of the public.
Sure.
So that the purposes of these vertical oyster gardens is not for food. I suppose if somebody was in a shellfish harvest area and grew their own oysters and they were of market size, relative to FWC rules, they could harvest them.
You bring up several points. One, oysters get too big on the box system, they fall off. So that would solve that problem. As addressed earlier, with community engagement and education is important, but the data is inconsistent and unreliable in many cases. But if there's a company or a person there that their livelihood is based on that data, they're going to be more reliable and consistent with collection and dissemination of that data to yourself or whoever else. And if this is a replicable system that meets all the criteria of water filtration, nutrient filtration, et cetera, then expanding the program beyond a dock or a creek bed or a mangrove somewhere would, on a commercial scale, would provide that much more filtration theoretically.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting perspective to take on this, and definitely, I think the biggest thing with this is kind of see what interest even is, like who are our main audience of people who are taking these vertical oyster gardens. So I imagine this will be, really a great opportunity for people who are engaged with, school programs or people, families with kids who want to monitor something. So I think that's a different audience that we could potentially start to target.
And to give you an idea, I've had 3 calls this year about companies wanting to come into the area to farm oysters, to raise, not just harvest, but raise and oysters. So there's demand out there for it. Why not leverage that?
I think that's a really great point, and one we'll have to think about in terms of how can we maybe expand this past our typical audience. I think the biggest thing is that I don't think anybody has really considered using them to grow their own oysters, but I mean, if this is successful, I don't see why not. But I think that's a really great perspective.
So Olivia, I have just a quick question. If I could.
Absolutely.
So I guess to the comment you had about the permitting, because I review environmental permits and the Corps of Engineers, and I think this is a novel idea. There was years ago when there were docks constructed over seagrasses, and folks had proposed compensatory mitigation to include putting oyster domes under docks to compensate for seagrass impacts, and that really wasn't supported by our agency, NOAA, because it, number one, displaced the available habitat for seagrasses, and it didn't provide the comparable ecological services as, say, seagrasses would. But this, however, I think if it's suspended from whether it's I guess maybe a cross member, a joist, something like that, I think it has potential to be beneficial. My question is, in your complementary pictures of both mangrove prop roots and also the exposed oyster reefs, are you trying to target a specific tidal range? Because most of the oysters I've seen in Tampa Bay, seawalls, mangroves, like you talked about, are intertidal, they're not subtidal. So if you consider that in planning?
So the idea would be, especially for our oyster reefs, to do it at high tide so we can get the maximum amount of, water captured within that vessel. So most of these are probably, I think prop roots, it will also be high tide as well. So I think that's also something that's really interesting to think about from a scientific perspective as well, because that's one thing that I'm really interested in is substrate and thinking about how do some of these tidal changes really influence water filtration over longer periods of time. And so I think this will really be getting at, we're going to try to target these when we have optimum conditions to measure a phytoplankton within the apparatus. But I'm hoping that we'll get a better idea here of, how tide may be influencing these water filtration rates on these different substrates. And maybe that makes we may come to the conclusion that oysters on oyster reefs are more successful than mangrove crop roots, which we don't have that information right now, right? And so I think that'll be something where should we be targeting specific style structures like a vertical oyster garden versus a dome that is traditionally used. And so I think that'll be really an interesting thing is, obviously for our purposes, we'll be doing it primarily at high tides. We get the most water to work with, but that's something to consider over, these tidal ranges of obviously tide within a mangrove channel is going to be very different than that on an oyster reef. So considering that flow as well within our measurements.
Maybe depending on the length of the bog, if you will, if you have it above the mean high water line and then well down within near the bottom, you might actually observe, depending how long it's there, you might observe different growth and accretion rates perhaps also in the intertidal compared to the subtidal.
And that's also something we were talking about, at GSI is there really hasn't been any study of like the optimal length of these vertical oyster gardens. Like one of the biggest challenges that people face is that there's a lot of biofouling. So obviously like the oyster spat will settle on there, but they also accrete, or they attract sponges, tunicates, anything and everything, which is great. It provides habitat, but it doesn't always, foster the best environment for oysters. So, maybe having a longer, attachment would actually be more beneficial for those spat. No, I think that's a fantastic thought and one that we're trying to develop as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, just adding to that thought, Kara Radabaugh, Ryan Moyer with Fish and Wildlife, they performed some TBERF studies looking at specific tidal range and sort of the optimal growing environment for natural reefs. And you could potentially use some of that information to guide future bog deployment, whether it's a longer string or at specific heights under the dock. I would look at that literature for future deployment recommendations for your citizen scientists too.
Absolutely. So on that note, I'm assuming that, do you make the recommendation, I have two questions, that they just look for neighboring oysters in the vicinity of where they're growing on the seawall? It doesn't have to be a complex survey, but if you just see the elevation that oysters are growing on the seawall and try to hang the bog at that elevation, you're going to be capturing where they want to grow in that particular part of the bay. And I was also wondering, do you provide recommendations on the time of year to deploy these when spat are settling versus other times of year to give the spat a chance to settle before the barnacles come in?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually going to be part of our study. I didn't mention that in the methods, but we will be doing seasonal measurements. So we are hoping to catch each season, getting measurements of our vertical oyster gardens and these other substrates so we can really see, that's one big thing too, is like, should we only have these vertical oyster gardens out for a very select part of the year and then harvest them and like start back over? Should we be having them out for the whole year? Like, I think that's something that like we should be targeting those times where oyster spat are more likely to settle, but maybe season doesn't make a huge difference in terms of the success of that bog. So I think that's something we're going to be looking at as seasonality as well, but also looking as well as on our other substrates to make those comparisons too for the season. That's a great point. Carrie?
At the end of your study with the tubes and the different types of oyster growth, are you identifying the entire community to be able to compare? You might have different types of oysters plus sponges or other growth that's also affecting the outcome. So will it all be identified?
Yeah, so it all should be identified. So we will be having, as part of the community science aspect at least, they'll be taking those photos. So I think that was one of the things we considered as, trying to remove any limitations that would prevent somebody from being involved. So we do want just their photos, but we're hoping we'll be able to, ideal all their species based on those photos. And then of course, if they would like, we want more information, we can go out and look at them ourselves. But when we harvest them, that'll also be something where we're able to contribute, as we're developing that scale of successful versus non-successful vertical oyster gardens, we'll be able to consider, okay, how much of this is taken up by sponges, how much is, all biofouling. So we'll definitely incorporate that into our scale.
Maybe consider just having them weigh the bogs to just get an idea of biomass.
We had talked about that, about getting just weight. So I think the biggest thing that we want to see as we launch this is how much engagement do we, get from people who want us to come and hang out in their backyards for, an hour every couple months. And so weight would be a really easy way for us to track that, but we don't want to create any hindrances for them to like say, oh, I don't have scale or I can't do that. So that would be something that we would personally do, but that could be another measurement that we add in if they are open to us coming out and doing that kind of work. So that's a good point.
Carrie?
I just had a question about your filtration experiments and if you were planning to have, so I saw that you were gonna look at the phytoplankton assemblages, and are you planning to do also like a bulk biomass, like chlorophyll A or something, to see, since you have different sizes of phytoplankton, and it would be probably harder to assess the biomass change just by looking at counts alone.
We had discussed that. That was one of the measurements that we had discussed collecting as well. So yeah, I mean, that would be important for us to definitely include. And I'm glad you brought that back up because that gives us, again, more of that to discuss as well. I think we're incorporating that.
I have one quick sort of just cautionary thing to think about. So I think a lot of the value of these participatory science projects is what you are acknowledging of getting people involved. But we know that oysters are really good for habitat, and they're worth investing in for their habitat value in and of itself. But there's a tendency to message around the water quality co-benefits that are there. And so when you're engaging with the public, we have less evidence about the water quality benefits and tons of evidence about the habitat value. And so if you are minimizing the habitat value and playing up the water quality, you might be unknowingly contributing to changing sort of like the public perception of what the value of oysters is and creating a potential knowledge deficit. So I would just encourage you to make sure that you don't minimize the habitat value of oysters in general, because as just someone who's engaging with the public a lot, I think sometimes the way that we do these interactions, we maybe nudge people in the wrong direction in terms of creating a mismatch between what a scientist understands and what they've been exposed to and then what they understand as a community. So just for your consideration.
Absolutely. No, I'm really glad you brought that up. And of course, I'm coming from this from a scientific perspective, but we have, I'm also really excited for some of our partners who also are expert educators. And if you guys don't follow the Oyster Boys Conservation, they have a really awesome Instagram page. So they also take lots of photos of these bogs in action, showing them as great habitat. So we will definitely be sure to incorporate some of that material into our education work to make sure we're also just showing the holistic benefits of oysters in general, because we want people to be invested in the work that you guys are doing as a whole and not just vertical oyster gardens, because they're cool, but all of the work that we're doing is important for the estuary.
Appreciate that. I'd like to give y'all a 5-minute break. We're going to set up the rest of the group table situations, and then we're going to delve into the CCMP topics. But thank you, Olivia. I appreciate that. I appreciate all your good feedback. So 5 minutes, and then we'll reconvene.
Oh, okay, all right. Awesome. We can just stay these.
You want to
Welcome back, everybody. As Carrie said, we'd like your input as experts. We have 3 topics where you might be an expert: water and sediment quality, fish and wildlife, and bay habitat. So find a table and some comrades that match your interests and your expertise. All right, we're here with staff to engage you on everybody's favorite topic, CCMP update. Yeah.
We're done.
As part of the update, we are developing a climate change adaptation action plan, as well as updating research and monitoring priorities. We're bringing those 2 topics to you today under the agenda heading of CCMP update. I'm here with my team, David Schaefer, there he is, and Julie Morris, to lead you through an activity to get your input on the adaptation actions, as well as some climate-related research and monitoring. And then Carrie will lead you through a similar exercise for research and monitoring priorities. All right, as you all are familiar, the last CCMP did incorporate the climate change vulnerability analysis. And we are taking the next step now to turn that into an adaptation action plan. The EPA provides a workbook guidance on how NEPs should do this. And there are multiple steps. The first 5, where the program identified vulnerabilities to their program goals related to climate change stressors, steps 1 through 5, those were completed back in 2012. And what we're working on is the second half of the workbook to really think about those vulnerabilities, those risks, and what sort of actions can be taken to mitigate, or if mitigation is not possible, there may be some risks that the program just wants to accept, there may be some risks that can be avoided, and there may be some that are better transferred to some other organization. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on where we've come so far. We've been working on this since the beginning of the year. And the timeline here shows that the climate vulnerability assessment completed in 2017, sorry I misspoke before, it was not 2012. It identified 54 climate risks identified across the 15 program goals. This is the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's program goals. We're looking at risks to the program being able to reach those goals. So it's a little bit of a different concept than risks from climate change writ large. These are risks to the program being able to complete its work. So starting in the beginning of the year, we met with staff to prioritize those 54 climate risks. They had previously been identified as either high, medium, or low in terms of severity and likelihood. So we focused really on those that were high, or high, medium, and the staff then were able to prioritize 14 of those across 8 program goals that they felt were most important to work on. We took those 14 risks across 8 goals to the Tampa Bay Climate Science Advisory Panel, the CSAP, in March, to their full meeting, and talked to them about what we should do with these risks. Should we mitigate? Should we accept? Should we transfer or avoid? And most all of them, the consensus seems to be there was at least something that could be done to help mitigate, and some of them partially mitigate. And those that we could partially mitigate or we were not ready to accept or avoid or transfer, we determined that there were some activities we could do to monitor these different risks. So kind of the we'll accept the risk for now, but we're gonna continue monitoring and kind of wait and see, to see if the landscape changes, to see how quickly some of these projected impacts might occur. We also learned at CSAP that the mitigating actions were highly technical, highly specific, and we recognized that we needed to really dig in with some experts. So based upon the 14 risks that were identified, we did one-on-one interviews with 17 science experts throughout the Tampa Bay region. Some of you are in the room here today. Thank you so much for your time in speaking with us. And across those 17 interviews, they range from 30 minutes to over an hour, talking about all the nitty-gritty of their expertise related to these risks, climate risks. We came up with more than 100 ideas for mitigating actions and monitoring and research of potential impacts and ongoing impacts. All of this information will be captured and retained within the appendix of the climate adaptation plan that we're developing, but staff really felt the need to prioritize and really focus in on those that were most urgent, most doable, and where there were partners ready to act. So after a staff prioritization of those 100+ ideas, we settled on 31 potential adaptation actions and 16 potential monitoring research needs related to tracking these risks and changes. So we bring that here today to you to get your input. We want to build some consensus around these close to 47 ideas. Some are mitigating actions, some are monitoring research ideas. We want to find out, based upon your work, your expertise, which of these are highest priority to get started with right away. Secondly, can progress be made in 5 years on some of these mitigating actions or monitoring and research priorities? And if so, who are the lead partners, organizations, individuals, labs, universities? Who are the folks that will be carrying out some of this work? So in front of you, or somewhere on your table, hopefully, are worksheets. And there should be enough for each one to have one within their area of expertise. If you're at a fish and wildlife table, there should be some worksheets related to that. Bay habitats, worksheets on your table for that, and water and sediment quality. So the instructions for today, what I'd love for you to be able to accomplish is to obviously select your breakout group. You've already done that. Well done. If you're online, you're going to remain in the GoToMeeting, and you'll be working with a Jamboard, a whiteboard, and Maya will be there to facilitate that with you. Essentially, that Jamboard has all of these worksheets, but in a digital form, and you can sort of scribble on them there. For those of you in the room, we'd like you to engage in some discussion to determine on a consensus basis, are these actions, mitigating actions, or monitoring and research ideas a high priority, medium priority, or low priority? Can progress be made within 5 years? And can you help identify and list the lead partners? There will be a facilitator recorder at each table to sort of listen in on your discussion and listen for the consensus and record that on your worksheets. So you don't need to be responsible for keeping track of your own ideas. If you would like to jot notes or share any ideas with us, feel free to do that on your worksheets and leave them with us. And that is the essence of the activity. We have about 20-30 minutes to talk about that. Ready to go?
Ideas about.
I'm going to see if I get the other.
19.
I'm Julie.
That's what I did.
I met you in French's office.
Excuse me, guys. We've had a small group.
Are you with us? Yes, I'm.
models.
We have another expert.
Natasha DeCrawl, Pinellas County. So, an assessment of we worked on projects together before with, so we as a long time ago. Our priorities, high priorities still there in 5 years.
So realistically,
Make progress in the next 5 years.
I'm the recorder, yes. If anybody else would like this. Sure, if you've got an extra
is
one.
that the fact of really affects not the bacterial population. This is affect parasites as well.
Yes.
Associated with it. I just have some others. Are there mitigations in the research or?
Primarily, it's been a lot of
And identification of.
And
So,
about 20 years
first of
ago,
all,
back in
That's what I think.
program goals, reducing contamination, resources
So
of
the
water.
first one is
That's been identified is that water
and
and so for this one, we have potential monitoring priority for trashing and so we can come back here once we've sort of done like a sweep of everything to sort of restructure and think relatively speaking about priorities, but if people have initial
Because
thoughts.
my meeting, I think that's like very high priority and I think at least with the MST, that's, I mean, I feel like it's exactly. And also bacteria. But do you think that we can? Thank you. I think that would help 5 years. Yeah. Know where it's coming from, you know, a ton of action has to be, yeah. That's right, so I think that first we think there's, so, I don't think relatively inexpensive. Moving causeways, like, yeah, right, I guess though, that's kind of the next step after that, is the whole, you know, maybe that's post 5 years, especially now, you know, really what yeah, sources coming from, so that in that case, we could just write up and exactly has one to talk about it, so challenging, but I think there's someplace, so, yeah, so it's like the goals for reducing bacterial contamination,
considered.
that's not necessarily.
I'm just saying that
It's not necessarily going to be achieved, like for research potential, I think is pretty easy to do right away. The goal might take a little challenge. I don't know if they're changing goals.
So the goals, so we'll have, so after this, we'll have updates of like our research and monitoring priorities. The goals for right now will be the same, and so it's just saying we want to try to how much of a priority should this monitoring program be, and do we think this actually could get us to that goal? So if you're saying like, oh, I think, you know, that monitoring priority is totally doable, but will it actually get us to that goal? Maybe
Planting and
it's
then
not.
have communities come in. Even after.
So that kind of waiting.
Maybe.
I think we would like action.
Very.
Well, potentially, it depends on like, yeah.
Well, I think
High-
that more
so
is a-
we're high priority.
Is it practicable?
And we're
Or-
progress, yeah. Right.
So not necessarily solve.
Making decisions. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess my question is, does that mean you will see, like, implement changes to actually do on-ground restoration conservation? Or that progress is, yes, this is a priority.
Or is it just like pushing the needle?
This is pushing.
Yes, right, is it gonna actually do something?
But, I mean, I think there's
For additional work. So, and that's managed by the state. Yeah. For the alternative restoration.
Because it's a.
And local governments would be the ones that would be spending money on the infrastructure and the
So lawyers are saying.
From the city to the stream. Injection wells.
The buck stops here.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're supposed to be on behalf now.
Yeah, but I can see like
Have
other
that, like, sort of human.
Right. Water keepers are doing that, but water keepers are off. They're doing a lot of work, you know.
So that covers that. I don't know if volunteer groups for that, more specific. You know, you can have volunteers that water, but not necessarily. But maybe there's a way, like, these partners, and then maybe also like a funding thing too. Yeah. Like, mini grants or technology program, or maybe that would be also somehow here on this.
And what's gonna be.
Like USF, I know has done a lot of resource tracking their state in a way. I don't know how you resource tracking, you know, if there's. And the restoration.
But I think this
USF can, you have that, doesn't, I think USF, sciences, but. Yeah,
conservation on
you
this
have
list is
always like the lab equipment, and like the salmon force actually.
I fully support it. Something else that we can do on scale.
Yeah. Like also too, you know, if it comes back and it's like, there's a section.
We can just exactly buy out.
And we identify that as just our watershed bacteria. Then that's where they can get partners.
With mud.
Community groups to go and do body bags or whatever like that. And then, yeah, the police, get the police out, that would typically after identify the source of the bacteria.
But for this specific action, I'm thinking media topics about monitoring. They're always discussing that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know what it takes to collect,
There's a lot
to
of.
like preserve that sample. Yeah, right. Right.
And a number of them related to.
Yeah, I just don't know. So yes, I think it's a possibility.
I guess you have to see where our ground. I don't think that it would be feasible.
We need to do something.
You'll see that there are things going on in other tables. So I think maybe right now.
We're gonna do all of them.
Yeah.
Start with this one, it's just.
We don't have to sort of,
Solve
set out
it.
the
You don't have to solve it
whole
today.
thing, but just being able to like have these things on the radar.
But realistically.
That's later on the list, so we're doing it
Oh,
already.
okay.
We're not just working on just
Then there's another, and then the next one.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that I really want to. And it was the.
Alright, so, all of our remaining ones are all for one particular goal. So it's getting nitrogen floating rates at limits to provide our institution to recover and maintain at least 40,000 acres of freshwater habits. So our first climate risk will water increase algae growth and decrease water use. So one of the first of those mitigation actions is adopting new voluntary regulatory
Yeah, I think.
for priority.
But I had independent.
Yes. We can imagine meeting with them.
Right. So just for that, and then really align it with.
Potential mitigating actions and
And
do
the goal is
research actions.
maintaining nitrogen conservation areas. So,
Yeah. I would say medium, but I don't know if progress can be made in 5 years. I'm just thinking about like, there are new TMDLs or new things that oyster that has changed a lot.
So do we think that we could put
A lot of permits, a lot of programs, funding, budgets get approved.
I don't really know what part like
Either mass bands ahead of time. Yeah.
Goal is just to adopt the new regular for that stuff. LNG happen, natural
Think you can is small. They're more habitat changes.
While you're doing restoration actions.
I don't know, what's that Michelle?
It's an open debate.
But if they're substantial.
Everybody's already freaking out, yeah.
Ray would say,
Not a pleasant, like,
Yeah.
touching back 7%.
Right. That's all I, and maybe I'm, that's my brain, and I can't help it. That's
Yes,
my brain.
yeah, we're about circulation.
Yeah, I think it's probably important.
But like you need it.
Yeah, I think that altitude is high priority right now.
Which will eventually, over time, if you so.
So,
Can get to be able to go strong. Cheaper edges.
It's so shallow, nitrogen, as we've seen that go down, maybe it's just very washed out. May is the issue, that is bad, could actually get.
Friday nights.
Yeah, not necessarily.
It's fresh water.
feel like a climate risk.
I guess that's what.
I think I did water.
Yeah.
But it is kind of.
Right,
So that's the case.
Positive on the action, which I think I was taking issue with. Is that action actually playing with that? I mean, I feel like climate risk might be making sure that
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Just like.
So do we have a collective agreement, priority, probably medium, just because it's kind of dependent on what we learn.
I given the action.
How much do you have to manage?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so fresh water baseline first.
And one agreement, no for progress management.
So if we generalize that.
Progress, I don't think you can. This is specific to the ground. So sea level, risk, sea level rise.
Would you say significant? This is barriers or not hurdles? Or will it take 5 years just to start?
I don't think any significant changes. That's my opinion. So they're worried about blanket regulations.
Well, no, I don't think that is. Probably it's just that there's gonna be that happen.
And I will say that.
Stormwater. Eventually,
Regulations.
That's exactly
Right, that's exactly.
That's the it's temporary issue, you don't have to just keep that
That
in
would be
mind.
part of the.
So I'm saying is,
Maybe
in order
not.
to
Yeah, you can at least get.
but they may not, nearby upland lands that could be stick to farms or something like that.
So
this would be, because we're losing, I think we would lose that deep water.
Unless you have incentive.
All right.
But I think to incentivize those grants and from the draft earlier and from voicing states, and they already talked about like incentivizing and for regulation. So go back up to the yes or no, anyway.
Yeah.
Maybe we just go ahead and move on to the next one. We have quite a few partners already. So addressing single climate risk. This one,
So I think.
potential action, storing oysters are shellfish. So
I mean, I love so for that,
This is an actually very cool, that basically, very low sense, doing things to say, what do we need to do? What's the best way to grow oysters? That part just is, and or when they resources. She's not ready to start putting oysters out.
right.
But, they're looking at it and saying, I mean, an oyster can use this much of this toxic algae before the oyster dies. Because it's, the oyster is a, so they have to have
shifting.
we could get a better understanding of what I don't think you do it for 5 years. That's definitely be a high priority.
Something associated with.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how.
So you're talking.
I don't know about that second part.
Yeah, I think we gotta get to document somewhere else.
So maybe the first part is not. Goals maintaining nitrogen loading rates.
So what-
What do we think oysters and shellfish?
Yeah, that would be-
Shellfish habitat, what oyster and shellfish. So like, I don't know, do Lily as a table think that potential action actually reduces nitrogen loading?
Yeah, like I need the abundance of that.
They weren't, like what you guys thought were nitrogen load rates, but actually mitigate coming in by
It just kind of
yeah, by those leak that out somewhere.
Yeah, and then they're close
Yeah.
to the house.
I don't know enough to know maybe half of
Right, because that was interesting to the, nitrogen, total nitrogen, that's what we measured in Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
I mean, it has enough time to get assimilated into Hydroton.
Oh, right.
So they can end up with some.
But in the other bay segments, it doesn't, so I guess if
They go, okay.
when you find out
Have that scientist sort of just spit that out.
study,
So the next one is determine genetic
flushing.
So
Like the residence time, I mean, I'm trying to kind of connect them to out loud. Like you got that
The estuaries.
restoring oysters and shellfish might not necessarily impact the nitrogen.
So, with my right part, we're starting with looking at a project site.
Yeah,
It would be here.
So
Some of that's kind of functional right now. It's already happening.
I guess that's my understanding is that,
Okay,
so
Down.
5 years, what about this?
I mean, it's fun. We never thought it was like. So someone thought it was, and then I thought it was high. Look how it's getting amount of water.
Oh, it's an awesome project, and like 1,000%, I think it's so
Oh,
cool.
okay. Well, there you go.
But no, it's not.
But if it's genetic,
I would say maybe it's a low priority. How we get into.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah. Yeah.
how would you?
Too much water splashing in the.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what are we thinking for?
Yeah.
Whatever that was.
Then you got
And I was like, well, that is politically.
Yeah, maybe high priority, but progress.
So they're gonna, they would be.
Really
Target for
same, high priority, not enough.
They're trying to like say high priority and then
I agree.
So if this capacity is high, and yes.
I think that's super high. That's the first thing I thought of, was like, if the water is getting significant nitrogen, maybe there's more sand and silt perhaps in the water, and that's what that's super easy. And what species is stress being, yes, I don't know how to do this, but that sounds good to me. Yes.
To me, that's a, I think it's.
Oh, yeah, I think definitely, because the Virginia is the algae that we're having problems with.
I would say
Not just training.
I would say sometimes.
Just because it's
I guess
voluntary.
once you understand algae, then you start listening. So I would say there's so much frustration.
Yeah, I agree.
And the AWG
Yeah. Right.
We'll continue to do
Right.
We're making progress.
Yeah, we are.
Still like in baseline.
I think this one is suggesting that we should put
Somebody really wanted to, yes, they could.
basically so that
For that one, maybe then we should make sure to specify a partner, someone in mind.
Yeah, I know, right.
It would probably be a research.
SWIFT should be on that list too.
I think there's one also, I just don't know.
Okay, 1 minute, start wrapping it up.
Yeah, and the temperature stuff. That just means like.
You got it.
Well, the grant program that are used. Yeah.
Salty and energy to.
Hard monitoring.
It would, I mean, I would love to.
So I don't know if we should,
But I don't
we're already
think
doing
having
it.
Continue coastal habitat.
Things are gonna be challenging.
So do we, so monitoring trends, we're thinking high and.
I think people, I think that's already, like, I don't know if Tampa Bay Estuaries Program needs to market and trends.
Maybe a little.
Almost high priority, it's already being done, yeah.
Resilient.
let's get through this last.
Well, no, I mean, I feel like it's kind of.
I'd say yes.
So I guess I just don't understand why it's monitoring research and flames, it feels like we should. And so, progress and higher priority and progress. I don't know. I mean, we're trying to hold it, but. Yeah.
Tampa Bay program being
Yes, but no, just because how much.
It's not a major source, and it's, and I, yeah, and I don't know.
Wrapping up?
We didn't
get
get
very far.
It's like those padded plants. Yes, maybe low priority progress, yes.
What's up? We're gonna on to the next topic.
I feel like it's the same. Yeah, right.
Don't worry. You are facilitating. Because I was looking around the table.
Point source, so that's like, so like the sanitary service, that's like storm drain, so that's promoting. Yeah, so, oh, you have it right there. I think is happening. And it's the priority, it's a high priority when it's happening. It tells you. It's a high priority for somebody. Where it's not hard. That one's probably easier to get. Okay, so. Additional.
Okay.
Instructions. It's not like.
Yes, I think so.
Who is the partner on that?
Yeah, spread them out.
No, I just.
How long is it? The meetings we had. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know. You don't really have any control.
We're being habitats.
But no oysters anyway.
Oysters are valuable. There is no regulation.
Yeah, I guess the lateral connection, yes, so like taking yourself.
Oh, I think stay to your survey. We
All right, we appreciate y'all taking the time to work through what you could. We know it's a big task, it's a lot of work. You probably didn't get through everything, that's okay. We appreciate the feedback that you have been able to provide, and we'll probably send a follow-up email. So if you want to read through some of the other priority areas or the other topic areas and provide feedback, you'll have that opportunity as well. Otherwise, we'll take what we could get. We appreciate that. I turn over to Carrie for part two.
Okay, so for our research priorities, this is kind of the third iteration of what we brought to the Technical Advisory Committee. We've kind of worked through these in a stepwise process. We started out with a general survey where we asked you whether we should whether we should retain our current research priorities, revise them, or retire them. And then at the last TAC meeting, I talked about 10 of those priorities that folks kind of had a consensus on whether they wanted to, revise or retire them. And then after that, we put a separate survey out where we actually solicited feedback on whether we needed to add additional priorities. So in addition to sending that to you all, we also had a separate survey that we sent to colleges and universities, which our intern Olivia is here today actually facilitated. So she reached out to a bunch of colleges and universities, asked for additional research priorities. So then internally as a staff, we had 4 different meetings where we went through every single one of these priorities in depth, and basically took ones that were similar, kind of combined them if they were on the same topic. We retired the ones that were recommended for retiring, and then we added a few more. So what we ended up with was 31 priorities, 2 of which are new, 2 of which are exactly the same as what they were before. And all the rest of them, we actually revised and added new text, clarified them. So hopefully we have a really nice set of research priorities. So for this part of the interactive exercise, I put an instruction sheet on each one of your tables. And you can make notes on the worksheets that you have there, but we actually have it set up to where you can go into a Google form and do your responses. And basically the questions that we want you to discuss amongst your groups are really the same as what we're doing for the climate adaptation plan. So first of all, we want to know if you understand the research priority. So add that in there. There's a Likert scale for the first 3 questions. And then can we make progress on this priority in 5 years? And then if your organization is going to be tackling that priority, and then what agency or organization you think could tackle this priority. Now, You don't all have to individually do this. If you want to come to a consensus and have one person do it, then that's great. Just put in the comments on there how many people your decision represents so that we can kind of track that. We also have 2 more kind of categories that we're looking at. So if I can have a few of you peel off and
Everybody could just kind of mix up.
go into
Round it
the
off.
climate change section over here. This is the climate change table. And we also have a public education table. So if one of these topics sounds better to you, please go ahead and move over. And then we still have 2 tables for water quality and for bay habitats because those have the most priorities. So get to the ones that you can. If I can have this water quality table focus on the first 5 priorities, and this water quality table focus on the second 5. And then for bay habitats, I'll have this one focus on the first 4, and you guys can focus on the last 3. So on your tables, I did print out the research priorities in larger text. There's also a large sheet if you're interested in all of the research priorities. So that's all of them listed out. So if you're in a water quality section, you want to check out what Fish and Wildlife is, it's there. So you can just go through each of these and record your answers. For those of you online, you can do it on the Google form. And if you run out of time, you can always go back to the Google form and do this on your own. So,
We'll leave this form open for a couple of weeks.
all right, no more climate change takers? Public education, anyone?
Incorporating people's feedback and making sure that
Nobody else.
So if you're ready to get the survey back.
different survey, the survey is
Oh, this is
actually,
the-
this is the actually asked survey.
Get in there.
I'm not understood.
We have some of these from some
Love
of
for
you.
you guys to mix up your groups to
Migrate to
participate,
this
like
other
the
water
public
quality
education
table.
section.
Tommy, Christine.
Can you leave the QR code up, Ed?
Yeah, so there's only one person there currently.
So also, as you go through the Google form, you can select each category and then it'll go directly to the priority.
Hi. I know, that's what these like the best breeds. Have all these new meetings.
I know.
Hi, I'm Julie.
As you can see, a lot of these priorities kind of encompass some of the things you
Yeah, I know, I'm okay there.
You can write on that if you like, but if you want to do it.
Okay, so we're in box. You're looking at our house. I'm already categorized that one, so I kind of do it anyway. Okay.
Okay, so you go in here. So. The rest of these are based on
It's up to you. So this is, so is this prior guidance?
The ones that rise.
Like that, I understand that.
Want to go back and
Yeah.
and yeah, you can go in here and see, you know, which ones. We understand
So
that.
there's only two that weren't revised, so I did.
I think that's it.
And I did.
So we took them to quality and
It was fairly minor. At least with the.
Try to make it. So basically the questions you want to ask, are those, do you understand it? Can we make progress? Like you just go to the website and we, and then if not.
I don't think we give that option.
The dashboard has everyone who's in charge.
But that's my, it's representative. Okay.
That is the one.
Go back one up, yeah, you can put it on your yard.
Yeah.
And sometimes just, oh yeah, so you see the dropping.
Yeah, no, I find that.
They have some restoration stuff happening. So I look at my inbox. Everyone in. Yeah.
How do you evaluate?
So you can just skip that and then just be like next question and ask what.
Like you need help.
These are, like, I think this goes through the seagrass There were some in there. Anybody in our house? So I think very
Imagine if somebody.
So the only thing on this list are ones that are proposing for the next. But he's saying like.
Everything to date, they would more or less.
Yeah. And then, right, yeah, they were, can we make process? The ones that, those 10 priorities.
Yeah.
That went through staff meeting. Based on, there were some additional ones. Well, and also, some of the
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Wanted to really dial in on what. And ask which agency or
So is this a good way to say
progress to address this problem? It's like, no, you could do it as a team.
The comments say it's based on. If you've got it working.
Yeah, and we're like
Right. Your level.
we try to do is
The Pinellas County. I came from Pinellas County. I think they all said no.
Yeah.
Staff versus staff.
So it's funny because.
So this is fair. Yeah. Because I also wanted to
So that's talking about like satellite. But I don't know.
Yeah.
Progress to address current emissions by and then for agency, I'll put SWC to start with. Just.
No, we live
No, she was coming around, she was, yeah.
Yes, good. See, he's so cool. See, my Are there ones who live in Hawaii?
No, actually, one of the new.
Yeah, that's what I was
Just, there's a couple.
I wanted to keep it close.
How tall it is, I don't remember.
maybe
Yeah, that's what
I recognize that.
5 minutes left, everybody.
I could put fMRI as well, because some of those labs actually use water
Got a whole database.
That's what
Yeah. So this one instead of just evaluate, I would also say and identify or like make recommendations. Like instead of just evaluate, we make
You guys have this fun.
In my first, we're gonna have a lot of
I think that was the case.
Survey for any of the other.
Don't feel like we have to answer a question about any of these. Go to the different categories.
The reminder is cool.
Readability.
Okay, everybody, I want to respect your time, it's about noon, so if you can wrap up your last question.
My organization will investigate this question.
mean, we do like some of the good stuff.
So this survey, this form will be open for 2 more weeks. If you didn't get through everything or you want to take a look at some of the other priorities, please feel free to work your way through those other ones and get that feedback in the next couple of weeks. We appreciate it. That's all we have planned for today. Were there any quick announcements before we let everybody go for the good of the order?
I have one.
Yep.
Some of you, probably a lot of you got an email from me about reporting on your restoration projects. So please send information on restoration projects that you have completed over the last fiscal year so that we can report on those. And if you are doing restoration projects and you didn't get an email from us, please let me know.
One, the Tampa Bay Swim Plan draft is out on our website under the Tampa Bay Swim Plan page, and we're taking public comment through June 28th. We had a public workshop last night. Ed was there. It was virtual. So we are moving forward to get to the Environmental Advisory Committee on July 11th. So we're hoping to get any public comment or comment from the agencies by June 28th. So that we can roll that into the draft that we take to the EAC and then the governing board in July. And then the next step will be to send it to the state agencies and local governments for review. And hopefully come fall, we'll have a final Tampa Bay Swim Plan update.
Just a reminder, at the last meeting, we talked about the special benthic study sites. Every year, you all get an opportunity to help weigh in on what those non-randomized sample locations will be for understanding benthic conditions in the Bay. We have proposed special study sites. I wasn't gonna see if you can pull it up real fast, but we'll share, this is what we came up with. If you can take a look at it, it's linked in the agenda as well. That's really all I was gonna do is let you know that that's what we're proposing. Any other announcements, comments?
Yeah.
Thanks for coming back to an in-person meeting and providing all of your expertise and collegiality today. If you have a preference for in-person versus virtual meetings, if you can shoot me an email or catch me on the way out, I'd love to know what works for you and what your preferences are. But other than that, we appreciate seeing you all and hope you have a great week. So the idea was this time.
Yeah, I did run a nonprofit.
I did too, because I started multitasking. I'm over here like, look, I can do
Scientific research organization, but our task is to